So, hello everyone. Thanks a lot for joining today. We're going to be talking about post-deployment AI and AI governance. It's going to be a bit podcast style. I'm taking the position of host and also being as a part of the podcast together with Stijn. And we're going to cover a bunch of topics from what is this post-deployment world, how does the G word, as Stijn calls it, fits into it, a little bit about the EU AI Act, and maybe what you have to do for your career and other things in this kind of future and what's going to happen. Well, I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I can try and guess. Feel free to drop any of your questions in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll try to answer them like in real time during the conversation as best we can. And yeah, so maybe to kick it off, Stijn, you can introduce yourself. Who are you? And then I'll introduce myself eventually.
Yes. Hello, Hakim. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Yeah, okay. Hi. And hi, everyone. Stijn from Collibra, one of the co-founders of the company, but that's now 16 years ago. So I had a lot more hair and a lot less belly back in those days, quite honestly. But anyways, good to be here, Hakim, and looking forward to talk about this topic, which I think is increasingly getting important.
Nice. Well, thanks for being here. It's always great to hear you distill your wisdom of 16 years being in the game, and also on topics, the G word, as you call it. And I'm Hakim. I'm one of the co-founders of nannyML, and we work on helping data science team manage their AI and machine learning models post-deployment, so after they've been put into production. And I'm a little bit less gray than Stijn. I've only been doing it for 4 years. I'm still young. Yes. So, a post-deployment world. What does it mean?
Hey, maybe real quick, Hakim,
Oh,
before you jump in there, maybe logistically, I know you mentioned the chat thingy, but on the chat,
yes.
I cannot see, I can only do chat with hosts and panelists. So I can't
Oh,
really do chat to everyone.
no, you
Not
can't
that I,
see everyone.
yeah,
Okay. I'm in the chat with everybody, so I'll keep track of it.
yeah, thanks. Post-deployment, Hakim. I mean, I know you love using that word. So, can you explain it a little bit for me?
Yeah, sure. So the idea behind post-deployment is that it's everything after a machine learning or AI model has been deployed into the real world. So to counter that, pre-deployment is building the model and the data quality, everything that you have to do to get the model in place, and then put it out there to actually be making decisions, driving business value, generating text, images, whatever it is. And what we see is as more and more people start to put AI into the real world, they're spending much more time post-deployment. So how is the model performing? If there's a change in performance, how do I fix it? Is it compliant with upcoming regulation? Is the data still what I expect it to be? I kind of liken it, the analogy I always like to use is like mainframes. So like in the 70s or 80s, whatever it was, there was a lot of time spent in mainframes for airports, banks, and probably when they were building those mainframes, they thought like, man, this is the real work. And then now, 60 years later, we still stuck with mainframes. And most of the life cycle is out in the real world. And I think it's the same thing with AI.
Okay, so let me see if I get this straight, right? Because you compare it to mainframes and you're saying as long as the mainframes have been around, as soon as they went live, that's when the mainframes post-deployment era started, which is still going until today, decades later.
Yeah.
So you're saying that if you're like in a Jupyter notebook and you're just training a model a little bit, uh, you know, maybe trying to do some exploratory data analysis or whatever, that would be pre-deployment. And then once you have it live and running, now it's post-deployment. Is there like a metric or a trigger to distinguish the two? Is it like git commit and now it's post-deployment or?
That is a big rabbit hole, but I like to have a pretty strict definition that post-deployment is when the end user is using it in production. So if it's like a predictive model, it's that the predictions are being consumed by the business to drive certain actions. And if it's a generative model or something else, it's that there are users using the model to get work done or do whatever they do with it. So that's, I sometimes am stricter. Some other people, some other data scientists are like, yeah, once it's running either on an API or on batches, it doesn't matter who's using it, it's post-deployment. But for me, the use of it is really what makes it post-deployment.
Got it. That's an important distinction, I think, because you have this thing of like a testing street, development, test, acceptance, production kind of thing. But what you're saying is that as soon as it goes into production, that's not yet post-deployment. It's really when people start using it.
Yeah,
That's when it hits post. That's when it's post-deployment, and that's when that long, potentially very long period starts with all of the risks and unknowns that come with it.
indeed. Indeed. And then that kind of rolls into the G word. And yeah, we hear a lot these days about AI governance. I know, you've spent many, many years in data governance, and now the topic of AI governance comes up more and more, not only from companies, but also in regulation. Yeah, so what are your thoughts on that?
I have many thoughts. We could sit here talk for hours about this if you let me. So, push my pause button from time to time. The reason why you know, refer to it as the G word in this conversation is that it does have a little bit of a negative connotation, right? When people hear the word governance, they often their eyes glaze over. They think of the data police. They think of 100-page slide decks with a lot of responsibilities on top of work they already have. They think about, they already have a job. Now they have to do more work. Or are you going to slow down my work? So I don't necessarily see governance as a bad word, but it does have a little bit of a negative connotation sometimes, based on history, and we get into that. Um, but I would like to maybe start, if that's okay with you, Hakim, by taking an entrepreneur's perspective on governance. And if you look at corporate governance, for example, um, governance is a layer above management, right? Management being the executives of a company, like the CEO, for example, making day-to-day decisions, doing operational work. Whereas the corporate governance would be the creation of a board with sort of a control function to management, where the CEO has to make their plans and put them in front of the board maybe once per quarter to have them scrutinized, right? And then follow up on the plan. So governance is sort of a layer above management. When you apply that to like data governance, then you can make the same distinction. We have data management, which is storing your data or moving your data and a whole bunch of other things. And data governance then is a sort of control function to data management, and we can get into that. And similarly, this is now, like you said, rapidly surfacing in the AI world. And I have my opinions as to why I think this is all of a sudden exploding. And we can get into that as well. But essentially, whatever you do on the AI management level, call it AI ops or ML ops or whatever the words are being used. But essentially, it's again about that control function and how you organize that in such a way that it doesn't necessarily slow work down, in such a way that it is not necessarily seen as a negative thing, but rather it makes the work move faster. It mitigates risks, which otherwise, cause the post-deployment to shut down anyways, right? Um, Now, but let's go back to the corporate angle because you're CEO, so you have corporate governance. How do you feel about the G word from that angle before we dive deeper?
It's actually, I really like the analogy of the corporate world. So maybe let me just rephrase to make sure I understand it. So you're saying that this whole concept of governance, it's not unique to data. There's governance in many other places, including the corporate startup world, and that the governance is this layer on top and unique from the management. So in companies, it's the management. In the data world, it's unique from the data, and it's a layer that comes on top that helps you basically, yeah, do what you need to do, whether it's the management do what it needs to do or the data to do what it needs to
Yeah,
do. And
it
yeah,
makes you do the right things, hopefully in the right way.
yeah. So then when it comes to my thoughts, I actually find it very interesting because I think probably the analogy to data governance is pretty high in that like when a company is small, and there's lots of unknowns, you want that layer to be as small as possible, because it's just very hard to navigate and to have that control function in place when new information is coming every single day and you have to take decisions. But then once your company gets to a certain size, that governance actually enables the information to spread and to actually guide the company in a way that would be much harder. So I can imagine that then the parallel in data governance is like, okay, in a small company with maybe not so much data, or with a few people using the data, then you have very little data governance because else the overhead is too much. But at a certain point, you just get to a size that's too big where not having the governance in place actually slows you down.
Yeah, I think
And
that's good. That's a good way of looking at Hakim. Maybe if this helps, another way of looking at it is that anything which has the word governance, it is really about behavior rules, right? And behavior rules are something that you apply to animate objects like people, right? And in that sense, for example, data governance is not necessarily governance of data, but rather governance of the people that do stuff with data. And then to your point, if, let's say you're a one-person company, I mean, you're still going to be doing some governance, right? It's just that you are as an individual responsible for doing it or not doing it. But not doing it is also doing it just very poorly and with a lot of risk. But as soon as the organization gets bigger, and let's say data work gets spread over more resources, take the example of a data scientist. Very often the data scientist hopes that there is a data engineering team who can take care of the plumbing, right? So now
yes,
you have two. And then there's many other roles. There might be privacy people and business stakeholders and whatnot. So indeed, as that data work spreads over multiple people, the governance challenge becomes more complicated because there's more communications, more handovers, and more things that essentially can go wrong.
yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then how do you see that translating to AI governance and that world and what's happening today?
Well, let's start with what's happening today because we've been at this game for 16 years, right? And we saw sort of the rise of data governance to the mainstream, even becoming a software category. And now we're seeing a very similar pattern, almost like an echo in history on AI governance. And that pattern is relatively new for the last couple of years. And I think part of the reason why it's exploding, and you probably know my opinion about this, right, Hakim? So we might have to fight a little bit, but you're far away, so that's fine. But essentially, you have old AI, quote unquote, and new AI, right? And I know they're both machine learning, so that's fine. But essentially, old AI would be pre-GPT being released, which is the more traditional. You take the data and you train your own model on it. And then new AI would be post GPT being released. The word AI was almost redefined in the mind of the people in the world, right? And the difference between the two is that the old AI was limited to, very skilled people, data scientists, who are very smart people with a lot of technical prowess and so on and so forth, right?
Very difficult
Um,
people.
I didn't
Just
say
kidding.
that.
I love you.
I did not say that.
I'm a data scientist, I swear.
Don't put words in my mouth. But anyway, so there's a number of them, right? So let's say that there's 10 million of them worldwide, right? And maybe there's 20, who knows? I don't know. But when GPT came, AI all of a sudden could be done by anyone who could talk English, right? So or call an API. So all of a sudden you move from, let's say, 10 million people to over multiple billions of people who could do AI. So I think that's the distinction. Pre-GPT, post-GPT, you had a number of AI that could get into production, and even for those skilled people, it was a challenge, right? Because 80% of models never made it to production. Whereas in the new world, all of a sudden it was an explosion. So I think that explosion, that order of magnitude of post-deployment starting to happen, is the reason, in my opinion, why AI governance is getting a lot bigger quickly.
Yeah.
Now, you can argue, Hakim, that it's also because of the EU AI Act, right? It's also
Yeah.
because of regulation coming into the field, which started before those LLMs, boomed. But let's unpack that a little bit in the discussion, and I'll pause for a second.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Actually, I have never thought of it from the perspective, because I always thought as governance, also data governance, not from the user of the data, but actually the practitioners that do stuff with the data. I don't know why in my mind I never had realized it from that perspective. So when I also had thought previously about AI governance, it was about the building, the deploying, and the managing of the AI from the practitioner perspective, not the people using the AI. But what you're saying makes a lot of sense in that, like, actually the governance also helps or is important for the users of the AI, and that will be billions of people. And so then that's a completely different perspective than I had. I actually never thought of it like that. So that's nice.
Yes, it applies to us all. Now, what I'm seeing with the AI governance thing, so you can clearly look at the regulatory aspect. Both Europe and the US, they all have their own rules in different ways, and then try to look at what AI governance there is. But we've tried to create a simple framework for thinking about it. And we're a little bit data geeks, right? So we like to look at this AI thing as a data product, right? And if you look at a data product and you break it down into its life cycle, and we'll get to the post-deployment part in a minute, which I agree is probably the biggest portion. A data product starts by being born, the ideation. Somebody comes up with a need and says, hey, we should create a data product for this. For example, an AI model in a chatbot or a Power BI thing or a Tableau dashboard or whatever, a Looker dashboard, pick. But essentially, somebody says, let's work on this. That's ideation. And then you have to start, finding data for it. For example, data to train your model. And even if the model is pre-trained, like those big LLMs, it still needs your own data, right? It still needs data about your customers, about your products to be able to give an informed answer. And then three, you need to document all of those models. What do they do? How do they work? Which data do they use? Um, Aspects around bias and ethics also will come under scrutiny there, because ultimately somebody's going to ask you if you use some AI model and then you use it to deny somebody of a loan or insurance. You have to explain yourself, like, why did you deny this person? You have to have a very good reason, and it cannot be a whole bunch of criteria, right? And then fourth, and that's to your point, probably the biggest one. Now this work is done and the data product moves from the development environment into an actual production, right? Running on a production server, but also with users being in there. Now the real work starts, right? Because now we have to monitor it. What if the data quality goes down? What if the data drifts? What if new things happen in the world because the way people interact with the system makes the system change? And then if the model is not changing, how can it still perform, right? So I think those four angles is how we look at AI governance, all the way from ideation to the monitoring of it in production.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I did want to ask a question about how also in data governance, but in AI governance as well, how does the control plane interact how does the layer on top interact with the layer under it, right? So how do you interact between the people operationally building, deploying, using AI and the governance layer on top? What does that interaction look like?
Yes, you're taking me back on my own words there. I like it. Thanks, Hakim. But indeed, governance is the layer above management. So if you say,
Yeah.
okay, we have AI governance and AI management, what is one, what is the other? I think if you look at the way that the big vendors, the hyperscalers, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, but also the challenges like a Databricks or Snowflake, the way that they look at AI is that, hey, the model runs in me, right? SageMaker, Bedrock, Vertex, a whole bunch of those components. That's where the model lives. That's where the deployment from tests goes into production. And I think a lot of the metrics around that would be management metrics, like, hey, is this model still running? Is it on or off, right? And a whole bunch of other more complicated things, of course. But that's where you would find the management layer. Maybe call it ML ops, call it AI ops, but I would describe that as a management layer. But if you then look at a larger organization, it's very likely that they'll have many of those, right? Or it's very likely that they have certain rules or policies that they have to put into place, which have to be translated into one of those operational systems. And that happens through some sort of controls, right? So you have to have that connectivity between the governance and those operational systems, I would say. Does that help?
And yeah, that helps a lot. And the idea is it's as automated as possible, right? So that people are not slowed down.
Oh yeah, agents do it all, right? Soon.
Yes. I just wanted to take a moment to remind everybody that you can ask questions in the chat or in the Q&A, and we're happy to ask them, answer them, be part of the discussion. It would be great. And also that we are a mixed audience of data scientists and data governance people. Oh, there is a question. So Lalit says there is another aspect to post-GPT governance. New information and issues about models' behavior might come to the forefront even if the model has been in production. How do you handle it? Do you take it out of production? Do you get a new model? What do you do with that?
Okay, so I'm trying to understand the question a little bit, right? So post-GPT governance, that's a new word, but that's okay. We're assuming that a model is pre-made and you're putting that in production to make your fancy chatbots or agents, whatever it is you're doing with it. But then maybe, I don't know, OpenAI or Google, they make some sort of announcement and say, oh, wait a moment, there's a bug in our model. I guess that's sort of what you mean, right? You think that's what the question is? Sort of.
Sort of.
Close enough for me. So I think in that sense, you have to look at it similarly to any other systems you put into production, right? And companies are used to putting systems into production for a long time. You mentioned the mainframes, but also the more deterministic if-then-else systems that we're very familiar with. So if there's things that go wrong with those systems, like there's a breach in one of the open source libraries you use, or some other problem, right? A bug in some library you use, then you have to, in production, update your system somehow or protect it or patch it. And I think similarly with the non-deterministic systems, right? These new AI systems, the agents, maybe in a few years also, we'll see agents all over. They're more autonomous and there's a model inside of them. So that's just a component of that system you put into production. And if the manufacturer of that component, OpenAI, Google, what have you, then says, well, we made an update to our model because, there was a security breach or one of those new security breaches, those prompt hacks or hijacks or whatever, then you are also going to be responsible from a governance point of view to make sure that your system gets updated. Otherwise, your organization has a system in production which clearly has a leak or a hole that could be used to, get attacks in your company, and nobody wants that, right? So that's how I would see it. I don't know, Hakim, you have an opinion?
What I find very interesting, a very big risk comes to light with this question, which is a lot of times you have an entire prompt engineering system or a RAG system built around these, these parts, as you called it. And so imagine you build this entire system around an LLM, and then it turns out that it is indeed biased or that there's a problem in its behavior, and that if you switch it with a new model, the system doesn't, then you have to rework the whole thing. It's not just switching it out, and that could cost a lot, but I don't know how you would protect against that, actually.
Come on, Hakim, we all know that those big LLMs, they're trained on beautiful, rich information sites like Reddit. Obviously, they're biased, right? They represent our online conversations from so many years and billions of people. So obviously, there's going to be bias in there. And again, you as an organization putting that into production, you are responsible.
Yeah.
So during the pre-deployment phase, you're responsible, but the responsibility and the risk is a magnitude, orders of magnitude more in the post-deployment phase.
Yeah.
Like you said, with the mainframe, potentially for decades, this is going to be the same here.
Yes. I still find that crazy. Oh, this is a good time. So we have some polls prepared. We've been talking a lot about the post-deployment world and having AI deployed in the real world. So there's just a small poll to the audience to understand how many of you actually have AI deployed. Do you actually have models in production, ChatGPT or GPTs or otherwise in your organization? I'm just gonna launch that poll quickly, and if you can answer it in your own time, that would be great. Okay,
Oh, I
bridge.
wanted to vote, but I can't
Oh,
vote.
you can't
Sad.
vote. Sad.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay, answers coming in pretty quickly. Lots of yeses. Lots of yeses. That's actually awesome. Lots of models deployed. Wow. Okay, nice. That's good to see. Post-deployment world is coming quickly. 14 people. Oh, no. It's like really going fast. Okay, nice. About 73% of the audience so far has models in production.
And do you think, Hakim, that's in production as you say it, with users using it, or just somebody doing the git commit thing?
I hope so, with users using it.
Better.
And then, I mean, about the whole post-deployment thing, do you see the AI governance as a pre-deployment or a post-deployment topic, or both, or how does that work?
No, that's definitely both. That's definitely both. Because to your point, the post period is going to be a lot longer, but the responsibility on the organization, whoever put that system live, is continuing, right? It's not only in the design phase or the test phase, it's in the whole life cycle. The best example, the best metaphor I found there, Hakim, is the following. So take a self-driving car, right? And let's say that the self-driving car hits somebody. So now is that person going to sue the robot behind the wheel? Like in the movies, right? There's a robot behind the wheel, and now you get hit, and you're like, "Oh, I'm gonna sue the robot."
Yeah, I'm suing Optimus.
Yeah,
I'm suing Optimus.
that doesn't work, right? So you're gonna sue the operator of that machine, or you're gonna sue the manufacturer of the machine, or both.
Yeah,
Now, the metaphor applies to those AI systems you put into production. It might not be a self-driving car, but harm can still come even from, stupid online chatbots. We know this, right? So, again, the same thing applies. If something nasty happens with that system you've put in production, it's either the operator of the machine who is responsible or the manufacturer or both. But ultimately, that legal aspect and many other problems like facepalm situations for your CEO because of their embarrassing chats or whatever. I mean, it's the same problem. So yes, I think the post-deployment phase is included in the governance situation.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And just I had missed a small question. It would still be interesting to tackle it about more and more applications being black box. And do you think that the requirements for the definition of explainability vary vastly between traditional AI and Gen AI?
Ooh, you want me to go first, or you want to go first? Um,
Uh, yeah, I mean, I could try to tackle it because we do see, when we started nannyML, the whole topic of explainability was very hot. And there was a lot of companies around AI explainability. And for us, we basically talked to a lot of data scientists and a lot of users, and it wasn't something that was really important for them at that moment. And mostly because the methodology that was around was a bit voodoo-y, and like, it's more about making people feel better about the explainability than about it actually being explainable. And data scientists can be a little bit allergic to that. But I do think there's a huge difference. I mean, now we have much better methods for explainability, and traditional AI is much easier to have good explainability for. I went to a talk 2 weeks ago in Porto by a guy named Richard Carana from Microsoft, and he had built an entire toolkit called Glassbox ML, and it was perfectly interpretable XGBoost models, and with the same performance as basically the more complex like black box models that you cannot understand. I was really shocked to see that nobody was using them, or not that many people, but I think traditional ML or AI explainability is possible. I think with Gen AI, the problem is the explainability is really, really hard. To know why a token gets put there in that place, and then what the total output means, I think it's just, I don't know if we have good tools or technology to explain, and if you don't have access to the underlying model, how you would be able to do that if you're just using an API or a little component. Yeah, anyway, that was
Yeah,
my.
I think you have a point there. The quote unquote older methods, and honestly, they're really both older methods, but the
Yeah,
traditional machine learning has been put in practice a lot more. The other one is now just ramping up rapidly. But essentially, you have a lot of methods for the older school, if you will, like you just described. So explainability is a well-researched topic in a way. And I think a lot of that investigation is now also starting for those new models. I believe there was recent work by, for example, Anthropic, where they tried to almost almost like highlighting zones in the brain, which were more centered around certain topics or something. So they are really trying to come up with ways of looking inside how or why this LLM does something. But again, it's the same example that I used earlier, the same metaphor that I used earlier. It's unacceptable for you to say, "Oh, but there's a black box in my machine, so if it does harm, it's not my problem because it's a black box and I don't know what it does." No, I mean, you're responsible, right? You
yeah,
are putting it into production. You are putting it in front of your users, internal or external. You are putting it into the market. If you don't know what it does or how it works, if you didn't think about the risks and how to mitigate them, you are responsible for everything
yeah,
that happens with it. I mean,
absolutely.
take this example. I'm sure everybody's familiar with it, right? The chatbot that was on the website of one of the automakers in the US. And then people started chatting with it, and the thing started selling Teslas. Really, like, hey, buy Tesla. So that's an example of nobody being hurt in a way, right? Nobody got injured. But I can imagine that the CEO of that car manufacturer is sitting there like, oh man, face palm, right?
Yeah,
So in a way, that's also bad. And then if you go to your CEO and say, well, I'm sorry, it was a black box. I didn't know what it was going to do, that's not going to fly, right? So you have to, at a minimum, show that you tried thinking about the risks and try to do something about it. Whether that's bias, right, or whether that's stupid answers. You have to, red team or black team or whatever they call it. You have to think about the risks and show that you've at least tried to do them or tried to mitigate them a little bit, and show that you've built something around that black box that allows you to protect it. And if it really goes to shit, that you can at least pull the plug on that black box, that you at least have that control, right?
indeed, indeed. And I guess that's really what AI governance is trying to do, right? Is to help put that in place.
Yes, at a minimum, it requires people to think about that, and that's end to end, Kim. Because again, we see a lot of echoes on AI governance that came from the privacy days of GDPR, which was 2016, and it's still ongoing, right? It's never going to go away. We see the checkboxes every day on everybody's websites. We're so happy with those, but essentially, this starts before anything is created, right? Before any black box is made or put into any production system, somebody's already saying, or somebody should already make the consideration, hey, let's use this LLM to do fraud analysis, right? And then somebody should say, well, to do that, we need to put personal data into a public model, and that is, not acceptable to our business, to our company. That is not acceptable to our ethics, right? So internal and external constraints. So governance starts by making the consideration, by stopping to think and realize, oh, should we even be doing this?
Yeah.
Because if you
And then a
don't
data
take
scientist.
consideration, you just start working on it for three
Yeah,
months or 6 months, making beautiful Jupyter notebooks, code up the wazoo, and then you put it into production, and then you're like 6 months worth of work for nothing, right?
indeed, indeed. And then a data scientist should be yelling at that person because you shouldn't be using an LLM for fraud. No, I'm just kidding.
Old man yells at cloud.
Yeah, exactly. Old man yells at cloud. That's why I talk about mainframes these days.
Well, my view there, right, Hakim, that the best way to look at AI is through that lens of Benedict Evans's platform strategy, and mainframe is one of those platforms, but from many decades ago. But to your point, they're still alive. And then there was a whole desktop platform. Then there was a whole open source and web platform. Then there was a mobile platform. The iPhone is 2007, so that really, was a turning point, I would argue. And then you had the cloud platform, which we're still in, which is a multiple $100 billion industry, really. And now you have the AI platform. So each of those is like 5 or 10 years of change, and then can linger on for a long time, as you said. But it's the best way of looking at it through that lens is look at it through like a 5 or 10 year change in the way that people work, in the way that systems focus their organizations focus their investment, in the way that they build systems, really.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's indeed what it looks like. I have a question coming from like the nannyML world that I'm always interested in. One of the big differences that I see between like a data governance situation and an AI governance situation is that you introduce this concept of performance or business impact of an AI system. And I mean, you might have a different, maybe data systems also have performance or business impact, but I don't think in the same exact way. And I feel like that's a new kind of paradigm in that you have this AI system, it's either making predictions or generating stuff, and there's some sort of performance and a business ROI and a business impact. And how does that fit into the whole AI governance world?
Oh, I love that a lot. At the same time, I think in practice, whether it's data governance or AI governance, it's often forgotten or pushed away with the excuse that it's hard, right? Like, what is the impact of your model into production? Is it actually generating that 5% of revenue that you said in the business case it was going to do? Is it actually saving that percent of whatever it is that it does? Is it actually making your machine so much better? I mean, that investigation, that calculation of the actual return that is happening in production because of this thing being in production, that has to be made. It has to be a consideration. Because at a minimum, if your cost of building this and running this is higher than the value you're getting for it, then you really shouldn't be doing it, right? So yes, that is a governance question in that way. But again, at the same time, I see that a lot of data people who are supposed to be numbers people in some way are, shying away from that calculation because it's hard, right? And I think data products, the lens of data products makes that easier to understand and easier to calculate. And AI is a data product. So yes, when you put something like machine learning into production, you should measure it on a business performance level.
Yeah. And it's funny because I'm a data scientist who cares very much about performance and business impact of AI system. It's like what our whole business is about. And I still get surprised at how many people in the real world really try to shy away with it from it, either because they might know that the value or the performance is not there, or because they think it's hard and they feel like doing other things, data scientist and shiny object syndrome.
Well, and maybe even a little bit more, right, Hakim? Because let's say that you're on a data science team, and the whole case for whatever models you put into production turns out that you're not making the difference, right? Your cost is higher than the return in whatever business performance. Then you sort of, expose to the organization that you haven't found your value yet.
Yeah.
And I think that's a little bit scary, right? Because it might, mean that your team or your job is at risk in some way. So it's a bit scary, but I think that's business, right? Business isn't always easy. So you have to be willing to admit that truth and then figure out, okay, we haven't solved the problem yet. We've tried this and that worked, but this didn't work. Now what's the next step? What is the next problem that we have to solve? A lot of business is just getting rid of the next problem that's blocking your business, right?
Yeah, indeed. And on that note, I think from what I heard historically that this is like these problems have came up before. Everything rhymes, like in the whole like DevOps movement, in the sense that the person who builds it should manage it. And that's like one of the philosophies that we are trying to instill with nannyML is that the data scientist who build the models should monitor its performance and also be accountable for its performance. Not maybe the operational side of things and the engineering side of things, but those real, because they built the model, they understand it, and it's very hard for anyone else to really know what's going on
I
there.
like where this is going, Hakim. So let's explore that a little bit more if you don't mind. Can we do like a poll which says Do you think that data scientists should be responsible for keeping the lights on in production of their models?
No, lights on is a different. No, 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 no. Lights on is a different story. That means that the model is running, making predictions, blah, blah, blah. No, data scientists should absolutely not be responsible for that. But they should be responsible for how is the model performance? Has it changed? And fixing it or updating it if there is a change and managing that
Right.
whole
No,
process.
I'm just trying to, rattle your cage a little bit, but essentially, um, if I hear you correctly, then you're saying, okay, let's agree that this responsibility is important, that the lights stay on, but that the performance is also above whatever threshold. And you're saying that responsibility should be split. The data
Yeah.
scientist more on the business performance responsibility,
Yeah.
and then the keeping the lights on the machine is more, I don't know, like a machine learning engineer or a
Yeah.
data engineer's responsibility. Is that how you see it?
That's indeed how we see it. That's why we think of the whole post-deployment like data science or AI space, that it's a little bit different than the operational side of things.
So, well, then, Hakim, thanks for being an example, because that is a governance question, right? That separation of responsibilities and making that clear, that's a governance question.
Hmm?
And if you don't do that, you end up with burnt out data scientists because there's nobody in the organization who has to keep the lights on that infrastructure.
Indeed, indeed. I mean, in the light of like what we see in the field, I think in almost every company right now, there's a battle of who should actually own the performance between ML engineers and data scientists. And because there's this, I mean, there's two things. When things are going very well with the model, everyone wants to own the performance. Yes, I did this. I'm driving the business impact. I'm driving the ROI. When things are not going well, nobody wants to own it. So what I see in the field is like the ML engineers want to own the performance because they feel it's a post-production deployment thing. And then the data scientists also are like, yeah, but I built it and I'm really the one who understands it. And if there's a problem, the ML engineers, they're not going to go and rework the model, do the feature engineering, do whatever they have to do to fix it. It's a very interesting thing that we see playing out across every company that has big data science teams putting models
From a
into production.
governance perspective, I suggest we solve this as follows, Hakim. Let's get everybody, the ML engineers and the data scientists, in Fortnite on an island, and let's have them battle royale it out. Anyway, I think just kidding. I see a little
Yes.
message on the chat there. Do you think a data steward can do the activities of AI governance along with data governance and policies, or should the skill set be different? Ah, that's an interesting one. You want to go first, or should I, given the stewardship?
No, I think that's definitely for you.
Thanks. I'd love to hear your opinion after, but let's take a stab at it, right? So the data steward, for the people on the call who don't know what that is it's a little bit of a misunderstood role as well. Very often, data stewards are seen as people who are going to clean up somebody else's data quality problem, right? And sometimes data stewards are seen more as, directors of a certain business line, because they're responsible for a certain domain of data. And for example, when there's issues between those domains of data, let's take a simple example between sales and finance, then those business leaders really need to align between themselves, right? So stewardship can be seen from different angles. But do I think that a data steward should do the activities of AI governance along with other stuff? I would say yes. The skill set is a little bit different in the sense that you have to expand your skill set. But let me explain to you why I think yes. So I think it's our job as people who know how important data is in AI and people who know how data should be done right to inject ourselves into these AI conversations. Because we know that data is important to make AI work well, but we should not expect that the business stakeholders know how important data is. For all, from their perspective, they might just say, "Well, AI is the chatbot online that I talk to. So why is data important? I can just talk to it. I don't need to give it any data, right?" So there might be this gap in understanding of how AI works, and it's our job to fill that gap. So I would say yes, please do inject yourself in the conversation proactively. Don't wait for them to come. Go there and find them because they have the budgets, they have the priorities. I think a recent study by Iconic showed that 10% of the IT budgets is already being assigned to this new AI world. And they said in the report only 10%, but I think 10% in 18 months' time is a lot of
That's a lot of money.
Absolutely.
That's a lot of money.
And it's going to grow, right? Now, the skill set aspect, I would say, don't worry about it. You know, study up, learn, because this AI governance skill set is a new and developing one, right? So there's a lot of materials coming out. There's a lot of standards coming out as well, but it's still a new and developing field for most people in the world. So don't be afraid that you don't know how to do it yet. Go learn and figure it out, because everybody sort of is figuring that out. And there is a lot to study, so happy to share some resources at any point in time.
I think that that question flows perfectly into the whole cross-functional discussion of this story. And how do you see then the data scientist, AI engineers, however it is, how do they work together with data stewards or AI stewards or whatever it will be, and what's their role in it, and how do we bridge that gap?
Well, I think the data scientists are probably the only brains in the world who can sort of understand these non-deterministic systems, in the sense that they're used to working with them from all sorts of angles, right? So all the skill sets that a data scientist has is going to be applicable in the harnessing that LLM in its bigger quote unquote agent framework, in its harness, if you will. That requires that insights from working with traditional machine learning systems, a lot of those skill sets translate. And so I would say yes, data scientists step up and work together with the data offices in companies, where you might find the stewards. I'm sure by now many organizations have a data office. If not, find a chief data officer. If not, find the candidate data office people or the candidate stewards. There's always champions running around, and collaborate with them, right? Exchange knowledge, exchange what you're doing on the systems, and try to just make that harness as robust as you can, because it's going to be necessary.
Nice. It's funny though, on the ground, I feel often the whole data governance, the data stewards, the data quality world also, I know it's also a bit different, but in the same thing, are so far away from the data science and AI teams that it's actually pretty surprising. You would think that they live on different planets.
Who lives on different planets?
The data scientists and the data governance people.
Yeah, but that's normal, Hakim. I mean, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it's normal. Because again, I mentioned 16 years in the beginning, right? But you might think that's a long time in your perspective. But in the enterprise world, it's not that long of a time. So in a way, that profession there's a relative newness to it. Sometimes give the example as follows. If you have a chief data officer, for example, and their ilk, right? Compare it to a chief financial officer or a chief revenue officer. Those are roles which people have known for decades. This role as a profession is relatively new compared to those other ones. So there's a lot to learn. So you have that problem, right? There's a newness to it. That's developed more than 10 years ago, of course, but still there's a newness to it, relatively speaking. And then the second problem is just size. I mean, even yesterday I was visiting a customer, and we had the whole data team. There was like 100 people in the room, I think, together. They just organized so that it would all be in one unit. And still, it turned out to be that they're not all in one unit, right? For all sorts of reasons. But essentially, it was there that a lot of people saw each other for the first time. In these large organizations, there might be 5 data science teams, and they might not know of each other's existence, let
That's true.
alone
That's
that they
true.
would know who a steward is or what a steward is.
Yeah, that's
The
true.
same problem exists with, well, you need to talk to your privacy people, right? So that social network and that fabric inside, especially large organizations, is still needing to be built, and it needs to be built. It's something we recommend. Proactively go make those connections, because again, as a data scientist, you come into an organization, whenever you're going to put something into production, hopefully sooner rather than later, you are going to have to pass that gate of a privacy person looking at it, right? So you better go find them in the beginning and make friends with them, so you can sort of fast track things rather
Exactly.
than having all your work seen with a big
Yeah.
cross on it after you've done all the work.
Yeah, exactly. And I know we talked a lot about post. I'm going to also just quickly launch the poll to know, since we have a cross-functional audience here, if you work together with your data scientist or data governance counterparts, it would be great to see what the audience thinks. But I wanted to follow on that. Even though we live in the post-deployment world, I always say that post-deployment starts pre-deployment. And one of the important things is when you come to start, like, hey, we're going to do a data science project, you have to get all the stakeholders on board in the beginning. You have to go find the governance people, privacy people. You have to find the business stakeholders. You have to align on everything before you even get started, how it's going to go into production, who's going to use it, what's the value and the impact, else it's a complete waste of time. And so that just kind of follows up on your point that, like, the earlier you do it and you make friends with those people, the better your life will be, and you will not get blocked from productionizing your use cases.
No, I fully agree. Now, at the same time, like the wave of post-deployment is a tidal wave upcoming over the next couple of years. Fully agree there, Hakim. And I also fully agree that it starts pre-deployment. Now, what you're going to see is that in the beginning, that iteration, that spinning wheel of, doing something and engaging other stakeholders around it is going to be a little bit shorter and faster. Because if you just go with a random use case, like a random idea which is not developed, and you just go to your lawyer colleague, for example, and you can't properly explain it yet, then they're just going to say no, right? Because they can't understand it. So it might be that you need to make like a little mock-up, right? Or develop your idea a little bit further, or maybe even a small prototype, which helps them understand what it is that you're trying to do. Because they need to make an assessment. Is this useful and valuable to the business? What are potential risks with it? And so on and so forth. So if they can't understand it, they're just going to block it instantly.
Yeah.
It's a block.
Yeah, of course. Of course. And I'm actually pretty surprised, results of the poll coming in. It's still majority don't work together. So 50% don't work together, but 42% do work together with a data governance or data science counterpart, which is
42.
actually
Is
pretty
that a coincidence?
No,
Not.
it's the meeting of the universe. That's actually surprising. Well, that's good. We have a good audience.
Well, it also means that we still have a long way to go.
Yeah. Yeah, that's also true. Okay, as we've been talking for almost an hour now. The audience has been very engaging, which has been really nice. So as we go into a little bit of a wrap up, maybe what do you think's next? Where do we go from here?
As in right after this call, or in the post?
Yeah, no, we go for a beer. No, I'm just kidding.
Well,
You're
like I
far
said,
away.
I think we're just, if pre-GPT, 80% of things not getting into production and it being very hard for all sorts of reasons, but still there was a lot. I mean, you're still talking about a multi-billion-dollar situation in the field, right? Then post-GPT, that number is going to go up by orders of magnitude. So I think for the next couple of years, we're just going to see a lot of investment continuing in this AI space, a lot of things more going into production, and a lot of those post-deployment challenges actually becoming real and people having to work on them. So this is definitely one of my predictions. And I would say, please, people, don't only think in chatbots. I hate chatbots. And please also think about the aspect of LLMs. LLMs are really infrastructure level, and in a way, they're so 2023. They're already commoditized. So, look your eye up to where the innovation is going, which is from the infrastructure, LLM layer, to the application layer, being agents. So for the next couple of years, agent is going to be a key word in your development, and that post-deployment situation will come with a lot of unknowns. So a lot of exciting times to be in data, to be in AI, because there's a lot of problems to be figured out. And if there's
There's a
one
lot
thing
of
data
problems.
scientists love to do, it's cracking those nuts.
I thought you were going to say causing those problems.
I didn't say that.
Oh man. Okay, so maybe before we roll into like a final thoughts statement, if anyone has any more questions in the audience, about the conversation, anything you'd like us to answer before we wrap up. I don't see any more new questions. So then I guess we were very good. And we got a lot of questions throughout the talk.
A great interaction, Hakim. Thanks for organizing this, and thanks for driving the conversation. I mean, there's like a gazillion topics we can still unpack, so always happy to follow up. And if there's people who want to follow up after because they want to study this topic a little bit more, also happy to follow up. And maybe I can close with a question to you, Hakim, if you don't mind.
Of course.
Like if you would go back in time and you would meet your own younger data scientist self, and with the knowledge you've gathered over these years, what would you tell somebody who's just starting out now?
So I actually think about this quite a lot because I do meet a lot of young people who want to be data, I mean, younger people, I'm still young, that want to get into data science. And the main thing that I think is very important that you vet the jobs you take very carefully. And that when you start your first job, it's not about taking any job. It's not about taking the job where you might be using the shiniest new technology. It's really important that you pick jobs where they either already have models in production or the path to put models in production is very clear. Because I see it all the time. You have data science teams that are 20, 30, 40, even 100 people that have been working for 10 years and they have no models in production. And someone who worked in such a team for 5 years or 3 years, the skill set is not the same. You can model, you can put stuff in a notebook, but until you had to live with your decisions in production and with the model every single day, making predictions or being used and having to work with that, you just cannot learn and really validate your skills. So it's really important to think very early on and to really make sure you take jobs that have models in production or that we're very soon going to have them in production because there's lots of teams that haven't been in production. That's still a lot.
I think that's great advice. Pick your company, pick your manager, and make sure they get something into production because those data scientists can probably make it all the way through to CEO because they're willing to live with the consequences of their decisions that are automated. Love it. Thanks a lot, Hakim.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Stan. Oh, there's one more last question. Let's see if we
That
can fit
was
it. Okay. As a
time.
student with a single year of work experience, is learning data governance relevant since I have little knowledge of actual working models?
Well, if you're asking me, learning data governance is always relevant. Period.
That's funny. Yeah. If you're working in data, I think it is relevant, regardless of your other knowledge.
Yeah, and it's a relatively easy topic to study. There's no rocket science there. There's a few important principles, and then you have to execute them well, and it's a lot of people work also.
Yeah.
But happy, Pranav, if you want to figure that out, we have university.collibra.com. It's free. You can go learn there all you want.
Nice
All
shout out.
right.
All
On
right.
this note, Akeem,
Thanks,
thank you very
Stan.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks,
Nice
audience and
day.
chat. Bye.